Poddo.
Welcome to the Ned Ludd Radio Hour. I'm Nick Hilton.
You've got mail.
When I booked my guest for this week's episode of the Ned Ludd Radio Hour, she very kindly sent me a PDF copy of both her latest book and an older one that made her name. My dog is eating his kibble incredibly noisily next to me. 1 second. Okay, where was I? When I booked my guest for this week's episode of the Ned Ludd Radio Hour, she very kindly sent me a PDF copy of both her latest book and an older one that made her name. The latter is called Distracted, and I only made it a few pages into this study of why the human brain finds it so easy to spin off in different, often unproductive directions before I had the sudden urge to, once again, watch short clips of Gordon Ramsay yelling on YouTube. You see, the human brain is an imprecise engine, prone to doing stupid things like getting distracted. Many of the reasons why we get distracted are hard-coded into our DNA or embedded in our neurological functions, but others have been exacerbated by the role that technology now plays in all of our lives. Most of us are familiar with that brain itch that occurs when some impulse tells us to check our phone. What are we checking for? Often that question is impossible to answer. We're checking because a signal has been fired that it's time for that small dopamine rush of distracted connection. Maybe you have a message. Maybe you have an email. Maybe you have a BBC breaking news alert that Prince Harry has been spotted hang gliding off the side of the Matterhorn. It really doesn't matter what your expectation or the result. You still feel the itch. The impact that technology has had on psychology is a new field of research, and one where the multi-decade studies required to give definitive or semi-definitive answers are still many years away. One of the other fields being covered in this area is certainty. Is the internet making people too certain about their opinions, too close-minded to the possibility that they might be wrong or might have more to learn? And to what extent is the internet responsible for this crisis in overconfidence? Or is it simply another manifestation of a totally natural mammalian tendency towards confidence? I just watched on David Attenborough's new show a leopard leaping from one branch of a tree to another, and it was such a confident maneuver. In the same sequence, a baboon did it less successfully, and it was not clear because it happened off camera, but possibly the baboon fell to its death. Anyway, are we just like leopards and baboons jumping from branch to branch? These are difficult questions to answer, not least because they scratch at the core question that should be vexing technologists. Is technology good for the human brain? Or is technology simply the result of a human brain that's screwed up in all the ways that technology is? Which came first, chicken or egg? Technological nonsense boosting or the scattershot human brain? To answer all this, or at least interrogate some of the ideas, I'm joined by Maggie Jackson, author of Distracted, Reclaiming Our Focus in a World of Lost Attention, and the more recent book, Uncertain, The Wisdom and Wonder of Being Unsure. It's the latter book we talk about mainly in this interview, and because we recorded it a few weeks ago, I've largely forgotten what we spoke about. Maybe the content of this episode is the greatest uncertainty of all. Anyway, I'll be listening, and hopefully you will too.
It's late morning for me in Rhode Island.
Is it a nice day outside? Because it's a lovely day here in London.
It's beautiful, and I'm quite close to the ocean and went for a morning swim and so it was a lovely day.
Okay, gosh, it sounds idyllic. No morning swim for me here in South London. But you're the author of a book, Uncertain, which is out now in the UK, as well as in the US. Out everywhere, I guess. Or are you waiting on German editions to release in the summer?
Well, foreign editions are coming, but probably next year. But yes, it's out in quite a bit of the world.
Okay. For most of our listeners, it's available. Now, tell me about the idea behind uncertainty, because I thought I was convinced I knew what uncertainty was, but it turns out it's a more complex picture than that. Can you talk me through this idea of the merits of uncertainty?
Sure. Well, first of all, it helps to understand that there are basically two types of uncertainty. One is aleatory, or what we don't know, the unknown, shorthand for the unknown. So we might have probabilistic modeling that tells us about the weather, but we really don't know what's going to happen.
Mhm.
Then there's the kind of uncertainty that I'm really writing about, epistemic or psychological uncertainty. That, in a nutshell, is the human response to the unknown. So basically, when we meet anything new, unexpected, ambiguous, we have a response. And it starts with a stress response. Uncertainty makes us uneasy. I was kind of reluctant even to tackle this topic because it just seems like this monolithic, foggy thing that it's hard to pin down, et cetera. But a lot of new research shows that it's got incredibly wonderful benefits for people, for flourishing, for negotiation, for decision making, creativity, etc. And so back to that stress response, the uneasiness is actually a cascading stream of hormones and neurotransmitters that have all sorts of effects on the body and brain, such as making your heart beat, etc. But it also, new research shows that when you're uncertain, the brain becomes more receptive to new information, remarkably. Your working memory is bolstered, your attention is bolstered. So uncertainty is good stress. It's a kind of, the scientists call it arousal. That's the starting point. So it's basically your own system, neural system, signaling to you that the time for status quo and routine has ended and you need to update your view of the world. As one neuroscientist told me, it's the brain telling itself something's to be learned here.
So we're talking about uncertainty as a sort of chemical response in the human brain to knowledge that feels incomplete or something that feels, as you say, ambiguous. But we're talking about uncertainty as a thing that's happening inside humans as a response, rather than an incomplete picture that is held as knowledge. If that distinction makes any sense.
I mean, what you just said is sort of the same thing. The sense that your knowledge is incomplete is actually another way to define uncertainty.
But if you ask me what 10,000 divided by 72 is, now I could, with a pen and pencil, I could get an answer, but I would always be unsure of if it was completely correct. And so my answer would be uncertain. But in a way, that's different to a feeling of uncertainty when posed by an absence of knowledge. Although maybe it is the same thing. I don't know. Maybe I'm drawing too strange.
I think it's kind of the same thing. And the lines between the unknown and our response to the unknown, our feeling of uncertainty, if you will, our understanding that our knowledge is deficient, there are muddy boundaries between them. But at the same time, yes, we're talking about all of the above. Uncertainty also, it might help to know, is not ignorance. So if you're purely and utterly ignorant of all mathematics, well, that's just a complete absence of knowledge. But if you, as you were saying, aren't sure, your kid has a cold and you're not sure is it COVID, is it spring allergies, what have you, it indicates it could be this, it could be that. I'm not quite sure. I need more knowledge. That's what uncertainty is. And that's just the starting point. Uncertainty, I'm arguing in the book also that there is, uncertainty as a spur, a provocation. So by seeing it only as something to retreat from, to fear because it's, discomforting, we misunderstand and squander the opportunity, the invitation to learn that uncertainty is. But secondarily, uncertainty is actually a space. Rebecca Solnit calls it the spaciousness of uncertainty. So when you're uncertain, you're actually expanding the space between question and answer. And that's where some more meat of uncertainty comes, or benefit of uncertainty arises. And basically, uncertainty is extremely important for deliberation. Studies now show that adaptive experts or superior experts spend more time diagnosing a new problem than novices do. So surgeons or accountants or what have you, who are the very, very, very best, they're working at the edge of the unknown all the time. They're curious even amidst routine. They take the time to understand their options in the middle of a crisis, and they're constantly taking on new challenging cases. So they're expanding the known, basically. Whereas Another type of expert called the routine expert is constantly depending on past experience. The old 10,000 hours, it when you see it. The doctor hears chest pains and says heart attacks. That's the routine expert. They apply their knowledge, but that's impressive and quite a great kind of expertise that falls short in the unpredictable. So again, when we're talking about that new and ambiguous and murky kind of new state of affairs, that's when you want to be unsure, and that's why you can be adaptable, because you're updating your view of the world. I don't hope that makes sense.
It does make sense. So I think, as you kind of alluded to, or maybe explicitly said, we're all faced with this uncertainty feeling. We all know the feeling of uncertainty. We human animals feel uncertain. And then we have two choices, as you say, retreat into ignorance, or a sort of provocation, invitation to curiosity. Is that where you see the gains in uncertainty as a kind of principle in terms of spurring people to be more intellectually curious about the world?
Yes. Uncertainty is highly related to curiosity. For instance, people who are curious can wonder about a question and then not do anything about it. You can be curious, but if you are curious, these are personality studies, if you are curious and you can then you can tolerate the stress of the unknown. It's actually sort of component of the curious personality. Those are the people who act on their curiosity, who venture forth into the unknown. They actually investigate. They are the ones who are more engaged at work. They actually more likely to be dissenters at work. And curiosity of that kind, the kind that's uncomfortable and then you're acting upon it, is actually highly related to well-being. They're people who have more pleasure in life, which seems again counterintuitive. You're poking your nose into the unknown. It's awkward, but it's not stopping you from continuing to ask those questions, etc. So uncertainty is highly related to curiosity and to again, superior expertise, to resilience. So, for instance, just to bring in another sort of lens on uncertainty, we all have a kind of personal comfort zone with uncertainty. It's a personality disposition, just as you're maybe more of an extrovert or an introvert, etc. It's not set in stone, but in any case, we all have a tolerance for uncertainty, and that disposition is getting a lot of attention in scientific circles now. And if you can be taught, basically, and studies now show that you can be taught, trained, coached to be more tolerant of uncertainty, then people are more resilient. People with sort of medical conditions that are highly uncertain, like multiple sclerosis, the studies show that after some weeks of learning to kind of accept the unpredictable, the unknown, but also to tolerate uncertainty themselves, that state of mind, they actually self-report as more resilient. And it's actually being used to treat anxiety and depression successfully, really intractable anxiety, which is so timely in this world when basically we're all anxious.
I want to bring this slightly towards technology, which is, I guess the kind of the headline, if I was a sub-editor at a newspaper, I'd be like the crisis in curiosity, in the sense that people's opinions do feel very entrenched. The amount of scrutiny people put to their own beliefs feels like it's heading not in a positive direction. The idea of like belief conversion, people changing their minds on subjects, all of these things, they seem to be linked to this idea of curiosity, this idea of truly believing that you know what you know. Is this something that is just modern day scaremongering, and that at every stage in history people have felt like, everyone thinks they're a genius and they're not, they don't really know anything? Or are we genuinely at a point where that curiosity, that belief in exposing the flaws in our own understanding, has become more limited?
Yes. Well, I would say yes. Basically, the two can be true at the same time. Basically, humans are innately not very self-aware. We often overestimate our own abilities, and we certainly overestimate our ability to even perceive the world. I mean, just on a sort of in a vision or hearing way, and that kind of thing. But if you're looking at, I like to, rather than look at the comparison across history, which is sort of a rough, difficult game to play. I like to look at what are the challenges of our day. And one of the challenges of our day is the certainty. Certainty is venerated, certainty is sought, certainty is seen as successful. There are studies that show that leaders who pause to deliberate on a new complex problem, underscore new complex problem, are seen as less influential. So it's riddled throughout our workplaces and our lives that we should we should know instantly. So this is a very important time to understand the misunderstood benefits of uncertainty. And technology does play a part. I mentioned a minute ago intolerance of uncertainties being seen as a really important sort of lever, or it's seen as a really important kind of lever to understand our mental well-being in this age of flux. And actually, there are some studies that show, more work needs to be done. It's just a suggestion, but evidence shows that as technology became more adapted, more saturating in our lives, intolerance of uncertainty has risen, across the board. And so it makes sense because, from my many, many years, 20 years of studying technology's impact on humanity, I mean, one of the first things we can notice is that technology is, all about bullet points and, neat, pat answers and instantaneity, and it's used in a way in which it underscores the human a kind of yearning to jump to an answer. In many ways, technology is sort of reflective of the heuristic mind. We tend to take the first answer that comes up, et cetera. So I think it definitely influences our unwillingness to be uncertain, or makes us more likely to retreat from that uncertainty state that's so important for deeper thinking.
But how do we square this then with the kind of deferral to expertise? Because this seems like, I instinctively think of, people denying what I would consider to be scientific realities, right? That's a classic example of people being like very certain in their beliefs and not really analyzing data and all of these things. At the same time, we had, you're probably familiar with this kind of quote that came up in the Brexit debate here in the UK, where Michael Gove, one of the ministers who was on the side of the Brexiteers, said people are sick of experts. And it was widely lampooned on the kind of the left and the liberal media. But at the same time, there was some truth to the idea that people were being more skeptical about what experts were telling them because, it didn't always correlate with their lived experience and all of those sort of things. That seems a form of very certain uncertainty, and, almost a kind of paradox that you get some of the most certain people are also the most uncertain. Or is it just that we need to have experts in order to defer some of the necessary certainty of society?
Great question. And I write about that actual remark in my book, and about the sort of embroiled nature of expertise today. I think that's a really important question. My argument in a nutshell would be that we have placed the wrong view of expertise on the pedestal. We basically have, whether it's our surgeon or a political leader, someone, we aren't willing to see political leaders change their minds. We like the surgeon to be 100% sure and express no uncertainty whatsoever, even again when the problem is complex. So we placed on the pedestal this vision of routine expertise, the one who's swaggering and knows it all and is instant and etc. But actually, what we need to do is understand that, of course, there should be skepticism about expertise, but that's what uncertainty can give you, whether or not you're the recipient of expertise or the holder of expertise. A constant room for uncertainty, for doubt, for skepticism is healthy. It's not a sign that an expert is an expert. And so basically, it's really important to understand that the superior or the adaptive expert will be willing to be unsure. And we, need to basically remap our understanding of what an expert is. And as a matter of fact, in the United States, there was actually a little pilot study, very important pioneering pilot study, teaching young doctors how to be more tolerant of uncertainty, or more, how to be more unsure. And they were so afraid to do so that they would often lie instead of admit that they didn't know about a patient. And basically, after this training and in how to reflect more, how to express uncertainty, how to, et cetera, how to try new things, which actually bolsters your ability to be uncertain. The doctors scored much higher on they began to disagree with the statement, an expert always knows the answer. Whereas previous to that training in uncertainty, they actually thought that's what an expert is. So we need to change our understanding of what success is and what expertise is. And I think this is, you mentioned technology, and not only our attitudes or approach to technology or to uncertainty is influenced by the technologies we have today, the certain type of style and tempo, et cetera, kind of uncertainty. But also, I'd say that, AI provides a great example of a kind of certainty that's embedded in our structures of our society. So the influence of AI is predicated upon a kind of definition of intelligence that's rationalist, Western, decades, if not hundreds of years old, as being intelligence is some kind of organism that achieves its goals. That's it, however it can. And so now there's actually a movement to create unsure AI. That's robots and models that are capable of being unsure in their aims. Now, robots and models are capable of navigating uncertainty and dealing with certain things, but they treat anything uncertain as an obstacle in its way. Hence, as more powerful they are, the more unstoppable they are. And so this new movement led by Stuart Russell at Berkeley and others of the top leaders in AI is trying to make the unsure robot, for instance, if it's fetching a cup of coffee, it will ask you, how do you want that done? And give you scenarios and have the human more involved in process, not just accept or reject the and one of the most important things I think to me was, again and again, when I was writing about and interviewing the AI leaders making unsure AI, they said it was affecting them. They were able, through working with the humble robot, that's their term, they actually were seeing that they wanted to emulate those qualities in themselves. And that's not something we associate with technologists. Humility, stoppability, teachability, etc. So I think that's a very important, although small, but nascent movement. And so and also second implication, if this hits the markets, it's still in beta form most of the time, but it's attracting a lot of attention. If unsure AI is something that comes into our own homes, is something that comes into the doctor's office, etc., well, then technology, instead of reflecting certainty all the time, will actually kind of could hold up a mirror to our better selves, actually teach us move the dial on this certainty seeking culture that we live in our day. I mean, those are all speculations, but I think it's important.
As you say, it runs almost contrary to the grain of technologists, the mindset of technologists. There's this, it may be totally cod psychology, but it has its own Wikipedia page of this thing called Nobelitis, this syndrome, reported phenomenon amongst winners of the Nobel Prize, who they win their Nobel Prize in a specific discipline, and then very quickly they start to make more and more outlandish claims outside of their discipline, and it ends up somewhere completely bizarre, either in sort of cod spirituality or being various sort of like racism scenarios, all attributed to Nobelitis. I see someone like Elon Musk, who is fantastically good at sending rockets into the space and building electric cars, but is not very good, I would say, at geopolitics, for instance. He has kind of created this cult of omnipresent expertise, as though he's an expert in everything because he's very good at some things. Is that a real danger in technology? I mean, you talk about these people who are trying to do unsure AI. Is the reality that actually technology right now venerates these sort of great men of history figures who are, I think, way, way overconfident?
I don't think technology is alone in that. I think that we do have a problem in politics and business and medicine with, again, venerating certainty as the sort of image of success. I think that to answer you about technology itself, we all should be really highly more aware of what incredible sort of daily existence, hours and hours and hours of with technology is actually doing to our minds. And of course, has been some research about that. Research showing that your IQ might go down, or research showing that your attention actually is less effective when you're even near a device. There's also new research that show just a short time searching online, just searching for information online, leaves people thinking they know more than they do. Well, when I first heard that, I thought, yeah, what's wrong with that? Because you're learning, you are getting information. But basically, it seems to lower people's capacity to understand what they don't know. Just people are searching for information, and then they're going to be given a quiz later on that information. They actually they predict that they will do far better on the test than they actually do. And this is true. And whereas people who are just given a piece of paper, now that's not the answer, give people pieces of paper, but they just are more accurate about what they know. And that's very important. In fact, people gain that kind of hubris from being online, even if they don't find anything that's useful in and among their search. So it's really important what's the answer here? Is it to take time offline? Well, I think it can be, but it's also important to basically understand, first of all, the benefits of uncertainty and weave that into the sort of fabric of our approaches to technology. That has to be a very human training, a human teaching. We have to work on ourselves. One of my favorite stories from long ago is about a technologist named Michael Charost. He has terrible hearing problems, and he got one of the first cochlear implants. And he really thought that this was going to help him be a better human being because he felt so isolated and depressed about naturally about his hearing issues. Well, one day when he was in group therapy, his mechanism, the technology failed, and he realized he actually could hear people. He realized that the technology allowed him to hear, but it wasn't teaching him how to listen, that he actually had to, in his words, upgrade himself. So, this all falls into the rubric of let's not continually turn to technology to treat our own ills. Let's continue to be, skeptical and unsure about what we can do, and also learn that at any given moment we might not know.
Human-centric, human self-improvement is a kind of nice thing, but unfortunately, the proliferation of technology in everyday life now is such that it's hard to imagine going back to any way we can actually step away from. You talk about actually being near a device lowers your attention span. Well, running away from devices is almost impossible now. I mean, it's certainly in the world of work.
Yes, but there are digital Sabbaths and take time a little bit away. And there are people, I mean, across generations who are really interested. And you've had one of your programs was about someone who created the dumb phone and that kind of thing. So I think that what it is it's not binary. I mean, technology also leads us to think in binary black and white ways, which humans are prone to do. And look at the dismantling of the lines between home and work. Look at the dismantling of the lines between gender stratifications. What happened when those boundaries frayed was that there had to be a constant negotiation, which is onerous, which is a burden. But if we want the freedom to be almost blended with technology, we have to take on the responsibility to have that constant negotiation, to stay wakeful. About what technology does.
You mentioned the dumb phone, the light phone, which was an interview I did last year. And it's a good example of something where, for me, it's like a really nice idea, But the problem is it's the only people who would ever possibly take up that technological offering are people who are basically recognize that they have a problem, trying to address it, have disposable income, are probably already interested in the philosophical ideas around technology. They're basically all the people who are best positioned anyway to deal with their technological dependence, their attention atomization. You wrote a book back in 2008, I think it was.
Updated edition 2018. 10th anniversary
Okay.
in 2018.
When you wrote that in 2008, it was at a time when every household had a computer and, children were starting to have mobile phones. You're shaking your head. But
There wasn't 100% saturation. The smartphone was very new, 2007. It was still, not quite the tipping point, but yes, there was a lot more technology.
all I'm saying, if you look back to the 80s, obviously no one could have predicted where we'd end up today. But in 2008, did you have a sense of where we were going, and have your worst nightmares been exceeded, or have they not been met?
Well, it's interesting. The first subtitle of my book, Distracted, we're talking now about the book Distracted, not the new book, Uncertain. But the first subtitle was The Erosion of Attention and the Coming Dark Age. Mm-hmm. And I made a case. Now, this is before even the, June 2008 financial crisis. It was before, it wasn't before 9/11, but it was before a lot of different, sort of pillars of our world crumbled. Things were looking jolly good, put it just, when I came out with this book, and yet I had this dark age in the subtitle because I'd done a lot of research on past dark ages and what they had in common. And many, many dark ages, whether it's ancient Greece or medieval times or what have you, were highly technological and inventive, and yet times of great forgetting, where knowledge was crumbling, and etc. So, I had a sense of foreboding because attention is such an important human facility or faculty that if you begin to fragment and undermine your attention, well, then you're changing your whole ability to approach the world, or how you approach the world. Similarly with uncertainty, in a flip way, if you can't be uncertain, you are stuck, as one science and philosopher, Jerome Ravitz, said, with brittle, fragile life experience, brittle, rigid life experience. The world becomes, it's kind of, you're stuck on the island of what you already know if you can't be uncertain. And similarly, if you cannot actually have skilled attention, then you are constantly being basically jerked around by a reactive mode of being. And so I had a deep foreboding, and I didn't mean to do that. I really just started out writing a book thinking, what can we learn from the 19th century technological innovations of the past? And then I realized, this is all on a spectrum. It's all on one line of history. It wasn't the bicycle and the telegraph were then and the computer was now. I realized it's all just one story. And then I also realized how important attention was, and began to see how fragmented. Distraction is often seen of as being pulled away to something separate. That's the most modern definition foremost modern definition of distraction. But actually, an ancient or 100-year-old definition of distraction is to be pulled in pieces. There actually is a line in Shakespeare, Julius Caesar's, about the troops being distracted, as in scattered, and that's the definition that I thought really completely reflects how we live in our today. So it's not just necessarily that subjectivity of, is this more important than the other, and I'm going to go with this. It's just the scattering, which is really, which describes multitasking, I guess.
You've been listening to the Ned Ludd Radio Hour. The Ned Ludd Radio Hour is a Poddo podcast written and produced and recorded by me, Nick Hilton. And you'll have noticed, maybe won't, that I've been off for a couple of weeks, which is not because I've been in the Maldives with Prince Harry. It's because I have been really swamped with work, and the Ned Ludd Radio Hour is a passion project for me and not something that is remunerative at this point. So if you want to help encourage me and support the project, please tell your friends, tweet about it, go on Apple or Spotify and leave pleasant reviews, preferably glowing ones, and all of that. The music is by Apes of the State. It's the internet song. And the artwork is by Tom Humberston. Tune in again next week.
Outside, oh, gather round